Hello, everyone, and welcome to SEMA 2025 here at the Collision and Refinish stage. Today, for this presentation, this is going to be about the importance of booth and air supply / quality and maintenance. It's a huge topic in our industry today, and the way this came about with us doing this presentation was from industry feedback through some of the meetings that we've had. And we're seeing that this is a very big concern in our industry. People not maintaining their booths, people not having the right air quality, quantity, things like that. So we just wanted to bring this up and say, this is what needs to be done. This is best practices. And this is the consequences if it doesn't happen. So with me today, I brought a great panel of experts here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
My name is Jeremy Holloway from Spinisi Americas. I'm the director of after sales there and responsible for installing, maintaining spray booths at Spinisi.
I'm Jeff Wildman, and I'm with BASF, and I am our industry relations and work with the different stakeholders in the industry and trying to bring this kind of knowledge out to the industry of what needs to be done and how do we really improve what's happening?
Hi, I'm Tony Larimer. I'm with SADA USA Incorporated, and I do all of the technical training for the United States for the last 29 years.
Thanks, gentlemen. So, one of the first things that I want to bring up that's on my list that we know is a concern, and Tony, I want to kind of go with you on this one to begin with. Air supply, the amount of air volume, how important is that in the refinish booth, and what needs to be done to make sure that you have the proper supply of air?
Well, and that's a great question, and it's something that we take a look at every time we go in a shop. And every air tool that they're using, whether it's a spray gun or a air blower for accelerating waterborne drying to grinders to DAs, all use an air volume, and many companies don't put their air volume requirements or what those tools use on the equipment, so you really have to do that research. And then from there, look at the list of equipment that you use and what could all possibly be used at once, and then choose your compressors and your airlines and everything accordingly. But there are some pretty simple things. Obviously you want to avoid small pinch points, small fittings, small 90s and T's, and as much of that as you can in your airlines. But there's a lot of things that I'm sure we're going to talk about that are important for that. But air volume is critical. You need to have enough air volume so that you can keep constant pressure.
Jeff, what do you guys do with the air volume?
So air volume is critical when you're talking about painting, because the wrong air volume and wrong air pressures can change the color. And it changes the thickness of the material. And as you start to think about how you're applying these coatings and the thickness, it impacts the drying time. It can cause problems later. It can cause issues with radar. It just goes on and on and on. And one of the things, like Tony said, is, that volume can change, and you shouldn't regulate at the gun. We always want you regulating with a regulator at the wall inside the booth, so you can have a consistent volume of air and a consistent pressure.
Yeah, and that makes sense when you bring up the radar thing, because as we know, if you're putting too much material on, then you're having problems. And if the OEM says that you put 1.5 coats or this mill thickness should be this much, there's no variation from that. And so having the wrong amount of air volume can really control that.
And that air volume really dictates how the paint atomizes. So again, it's not just the thickness, but it also impacts the color and the way metallics will lay in that color.
Right. So, when, and I'll go ahead and, Jeremy, when you guys are putting in paint booths, are you looking at, do you handle that, or you put the booths in and call somebody else, or, how does that work when you guys are installing paint booths?
We use another company to install the airlines, but if we're speaking about compressed air volume, at least with our product, there are some other parts of the spray booth that require compressed air other than just actually painting the car. So like in a Spinisi spray booth, there is a recirculation damper that when you put it into the bake mode, it actually flips over and it actually is recirculating its own heat. So if you didn't have enough compressed air to make that damper flip over, you would potentially, it would never fully go into bake mode. So we've seen, in a couple cases where maybe technician left for the evening, left it on bake mode, and someone shut the air compressor off, it doesn't flip over into recirculation mode, and then the thing never actually bakes the car. So if you actually didn't have enough air to flip the recirculation damper over, it's possible that it wouldn't function properly and be able to cure the finish.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I didn't even realize that. So that's good information. So when we look at, air supply and air quality kind of work together too. Air hoses. I know a lot of times in the paint booth especially, we're not replacing those air hoses enough, and you can really see the inside of that break down. And it always breaks down when you're painting a white car, right? You get that white car and you left that air hose in there for 6 months, 7 months, and through all the bake cycles and all that. And next thing you know, you got black stuff just spitting out your gun, and that's part of the inside of the air hose. But what do you guys recommend as far as air hose and how often to replace them and what type to use? And is there a standard that you guys recommend?
Well, one of the things that we look at, number one, we make a breathing hose that is used for our breathing hoods, that has a liner inside that's not the rubber liner that's going to come apart. And those work very well for the painting side too, because they also don't allow contaminants from the outside to get in. So if someone is in a solvent shop wetting a booth floor down, or they're painting and have overspray that get on a hose, it isn't getting inside the hose, so that's also not contaminating your paint jobs. So there's hoses like that are worth having. And then a simple test with a hose, if you just twist the end where it attaches to a coupler or nipple, you'll see some minor cracks that start to form on those outside edges of that outer coating, and when that starts to happen, it's time to replace them. And that could be 6 months, it could be 3 months in the right shop, but it definitely is something that needs to be checked.
Jeff, what do you think about that?
I mean, I agree exactly with what Tony was saying, and it's a key that we look at because, contrary to popular belief, we do not put dirt in the paint.
Are you sure about that?
And again, when we talk about it, a lot of it comes out of the air hose. And best practice is once you're done spraying that car, disconnect the air hose and take it out of the booth. Very seldom happens. But again, that's what we recommend. That's the best practice we try and put in place. And then it's a matter of working with our partners to understand what type of hose do you have, how long does it last, how often should they be replaced. And you also mentioned fresh air. And that's a real consideration because, again, best practice that we recommend is fresh air supply. So where's the air coming from for that? How is that air managed and to make sure it's safe? Is it coming from the same compressor? Is it coming from a separate compressor? And how is that maintained?
And that's perfect. And that brings me into kind of one of my next things I wanted to talk about, which is the style of filter systems. And I know I'm talking more into the booth than into the fresh air, but, we can expand and talk about both of them, because we're here to educate, right? And so if there's people out there that may not know that there's even a difference, right, to the level of air that you have there. So with air quality, we need moisture levels, we need to be at a minimum. So what styles, I'm going to start with you again, Tony, what style filter systems do you recommend? Not necessarily brands, obviously I know what brand you recommend, but what styles do you recommend, even outside what you guys install?
Well, the first thing we check when we go into a shop is, number one, are you spraying solvent? Are you spraying waterborne? Are you going to breathe this air? I mean, those are serious questions. And then how much air volume do you need? And the first thing, no matter whose filtration you need to find out is, what's their CFM capabilities? Because do I need to put a filter at every port where I'm going to be spraying in a prep deck or in different booths, or can I get one that has enough air volume to handle the shop? The other things we look at is, do we need carbon or charcoal on the filter on the wall? Because if I have the charcoal there, that's going to eliminate in the last stage all the way down into oil vapors, it eliminates odors, all of that stuff that are contaminants that we don't want in our finish. And so those are the biggest questions. Or am I spraying solvent only and I'm not going to breathe the air? You may not have to add the carbon, but we still recommend it because it definitely helps to keep those contaminants. And I know you mentioned humidity. People, yes, we need to get as much of that humidity out of the lines as we can, but there's also a point where people will get so focused on eliminating humidity that they'll use filters that have desiccant dust breaking down or things like that that are causing contamination that they didn't even think of. So you just have to make sure that you're looking at a way, maybe it's adding a refrigerant dryer in front of that system, or getting the air dry first before it goes into your piping, and then eliminate all of the contaminants, oil, debris from the plumbing, all of that stuff with a filter that can handle that. And I know you know which ones I sell, but we go all the way down to 0.05 microns to make sure that it's clean enough to breathe. And so if you have breathing air quality, your paint jobs are going to be cleaner too.
Yeah, and that's a good point. People need to realize when you're opening a shop, and when you're planning your air volume, your air lines and everything, we all know that air picks up moisture as it goes. It gets contaminated the farther it goes. So you're right. You need to clean it with that refrigerant dryer to begin with. But then, stages down there, we need to make sure that it's clean because we got to think about those body repairmen too, right? They need at least somewhat clean air, not maybe as much as us, but so we do need to clean it in stages. And then the most important is when it's coming out for that spray gun. And I used to always tell my students, in your spray gun, I would rather have 2 short hoses, one on each side, than 1 long hose, right? And everybody has, we've all went in that shop that you've got that air hose you could wrap around the car 3 or 4 times. And what's happening is it's picking up moisture even after you've cleaned it that final time. And that's not something we want. So the shorter you can keep that air hose, the better off you are too, just so that it doesn't pick up that last little bit. Jeff, is there a certain moisture level that you guys are looking for? Do you have like if somebody comes in for a warranty, or somebody you're putting in BASF in a shop, or is there a certain level that you're testing for exactly?
Not exactly a specific. I mean, we're trying to get that air as dry as possible. And again, there's so many factors that go into that. We're going to rely on somebody like Tony to come in and really work with us on that. One of the big things for us is we want a filter there in the booth where we can regulate the air volume and air pressure and really have clean air right there coming into the booth. Because that's the best way for us to really ensure that we've got good clean air and we're not putting debris or contaminants into that paint finish. And I mean, it's an issue on every finish, but as we've seen matte finishes become more and more popular, that's a big area of concern. And if you don't have good clean air and a good clean booth, you can't buff out a matte finish.
Right. Yeah.
That means we've got to redo. So again, these become really, really critical as you start to look at where coatings are going and the types of finishes we're seeing.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Some of my students, when I used to teach, they would tell me they wanted their vehicle a matte finish because it was easier to take care of. No, it's actually the opposite. So, before we move on to some else, any other comments any of you guys want to make on this?
Well, one thing I do have when we go into, whether it's installing filtration or our airlines or whatever, we rely on companies like Spinisi because there's air solenoids that are there to shut the air off to the booth when it's on bake cycle and all of that. And having those that have enough air volume to get through them to do the job you need inside the booth is critical. And you wouldn't think that would even be a question, but there's a lot of solenoids out there that weren't made for the air volume that we have. And I know you guys take take that and keep that in mind. And it's important because if you're struggling in a shop where you just can't, I've got plenty of air volume outside the booth, but inside the booth I don't, maybe take a look at what solenoid you have and get some advice from a booth manufacturer that knows what a proper solenoid is, and have that installed, and it can save a lot of errors.
And you talk about the other things when you're talking about just the hose. We require high flow air fittings in the booth. If you don't have high flow air fittings, you're reducing the amount of air pressure, the amount of volume, and that can impact things. So even the fittings you're using, and like mentioned earlier, we want you to manage the air pressure at the wall, not at the gun. And I'm going to throw this back to Tony because when you talk about guns, a lot of people want to use that cheater valve at the gun to manage that, and that's going to cut your air pressure and the air volume. But if you can go into that.
Yeah, well, definitely. The biggest thing is with a high flow fitting, it isn't just spray guns. I mean, if you're running a DA, or if you're in a shop that's trying to use an impact to take lug nuts off a truck and you don't have enough air volume to make that tool run, it's not going to work. But with the spray gun side, where it's really important is if you have a very small hole in a fitting, now that gun is going to use, let's say it's an HVLP gun that needs 15 CFM to run at 29 pounds. If I don't have enough opening, now that the velocity has to speed up to get the volume that the gun needs to work. And when that velocity speeds up, when it goes through that gun faster and it comes out of that air cap at a higher velocity, it now blows. You're squeezing around paint and you're using those horns on that air cap to squeeze it into a flat surface. Those holes now have little tiny fingers of air when you turn it up too high in velocity that blow through your fan. And all of a sudden you'll see when you spray a car where you get like little fingers of color coming off of it that creates mottling, it creates blotchiness. All of that's because much of that can be because you don't have enough air volume and you're compensating with air pressure, and it's blowing holes right through the fan, causing more overspray, causing metallic issues, causing your film build can become too thin. All of those things happen, and so high flow fittings in the paint shop are really a requirement.
Those are all great points. I mean, there's a lot of things that people just don't think about. They just want to get their tools running, right? And that's all they could go grab that normal fitting we've been using since I was very small. So a little bit of technology has changed. So, I want to go in, as we go into the booth maintenance. Before we do that, I want to go over booth, maybe installation, maybe differences with you guys between Tony mentioned it, between water and solvent. Because the one pet peeve I've had for a while since waterborne has become so much more popular is everybody now all of a sudden is like, oh my gosh, we got to have clean, dry air. Well, we've always had to have clean, dry air. I mean, I would tell, technicians and students that, with solvent, sometimes if you have moisture in the lines, we can bridge that gap. We have, even if we have some, fish eyes, we can find ways, because we've been doing this for years. We figured it out. We're bridging that gap. But is that good? No. That is not good down the road. You're just getting the car out now, but we know that that's a problem. So it's kind of a pet peeve that, now with water being so popular, it's like, oh, we got to have, great clean air. We've always supposed to have had great clean air.
But the other thing, besides just waterborne, you look at our solvent clears today, obviously, and majority of the clear we're spraying here is solvent-based clear coat. We've eliminated most of the solvent out of there. So now when you're mixing things at 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 and no solvent or only a minimal amount, the problem is in the old days we had a lot of thinner. It could be 50% of that formula was thinner that would wash away some of those sins, some of those contaminants it would be carried away with the thinner as it evaporated. Now we're looking at where we've got these very tiny molecules that are making up the paint to give us this high solid, super flexible clears that we have today that are more impact resistant, more chemical resistant, but they're also more susceptible to contamination because they don't have all that added thinner to help reduce or thin or wash away that contaminants. So today it's not just in the color, it's also in our products we use, our clear coats. We need to make sure that we keep things cleaner. And it's also little things like, the regulator in the booth is critical. We've gotten to a point where we put the filter part of it on the outside of the booth with the drain valves outside and put the regulator inside, because I don't want that yellow stain down the wall with whatever's coming out of that water trap or out of that oil separator on the booth wall. And those days, in the old days, we would walk over, painters, and you see them, they walk over to the filter and open a manual valve, get it on their glove, and then go wipe the car off, and then wonder why they're seeing rag marks in a finish. But so getting it outside the booth, putting an automatic drain valve on it, so you're not having to remember to do that between each job, and then just have the regulation inside, it certainly keeps the inside of that booth clean like it should be.
Jeremy, I'm going to go with you on this one. Booth maintenance. I know, being that you guys build and install booths, and you can talk a little bit about maybe what are some of the challenges you're seeing out there with booth maintenance, and do you see a big difference between the water basins we're on this point, people maintaining if they're set up for water more than solvent, or what's the challenges that you're seeing out there with maintenance? Just to get a generalized start, then we'll go into stuff like lighting, things like that.
I would say the biggest challenge, with any spray booth company, is getting the customer to change the filters on a regular basis. If we're talking about we were talking about the contaminant thing. If you introduce contaminants into the environment inside of the booth, they don't always just go onto the car. They can also get captured in the filters, and then you're reintroducing that into your environment as you're painting the car. So when we're talking about the drain on the bottom of the filter, allowing the oil and all the things it captured to drain out, that also goes into your filters. But if we're talking about filters in general, a modern spray booth is designed to compensate for the filters capturing paint. So what happens is it causes the booth to work harder, or the motors to spin faster to keep up for the filters that are actually beginning to clog. They're called paint stop filters. So when you stop the paint, obviously there's less airflow, and something has to compensate for that. So our biggest challenge is, getting people to change those filters on a regular basis. Obviously, there's a point where the booth can't keep up. It can't provide enough airflow to make the paint product perform the way it's supposed to, because we know curing paint product is all about airflow, getting movement across the surface of the car to flash the water or solvents out of the product. So really, and then like if you're looking at changing the filters, some of the things that can happen if you don't, you could be in a situation where you're replacing some very costly parts in the spray booth. You could be buying an intake or an exhaust motor. You could be buying an inverter, and then we all know what it costs the shop when the booth goes down, right? So, when I talk to customers about booth maintenance, I say, hey, what's your average RO? And they tell me what it is, and then I say, okay, well, if the booth goes down for 48 hours, what's it look like if you just can't paint cars? What does that cost you? How many customers are upset? So really, booth maintenance, to me, is like probably one of the most important things to keep production going in the body shop.
Jeremy hit on a couple of really key points, especially about waterborne. Waterborne really dries by that airflow, and that's why you see a lot of shops using those blowers. They put blowers in the booth, which uses more compressed air and needs a lot of volume. But also, if you're not keeping your filters clean and your booth clean, all those blowers just blow all that overspray and dirt all over the vehicle. Again, just creating more issues in the booth.
Yeah, you make a good point. So if you're buying a full downdraft spray booth, right? It's designed for air to come in the ceiling and exit the floor. It's pretty simple to understand. When the air cannot exit the floor properly, it has to go somewhere, right? And what it ends up doing is spinning dirt and contaminants around, and it throws it all over the side of the car. It could throw it all over the side of the air spray on the inside of the cabin. So we've got dirtier spray booths now. So really, I mean, filter changes is really one of the key things.
Well, and let's talk lighting. I've been into some paint booths where all the colors match because I can't see them. So I mean, if you take enough light out of it, you know, it all looks good, right? I mean, it's just, and I'm joking, obviously, but I have been into shops. I walk into the paint booth, and I really don't understand how the painters in there painting a car. Lighting is such an important thing. A lot of people don't realize that you don't. This is not like your house where, oh, the light goes out, you replace it. Your lights should be replaced on a schedule, and they should be the proper lights that's recommended by your paint booth company. You don't just go out to Lowe's and buy, you know, whatever you see. So can you touch on that a little bit, Jeremy?
We've seen from a few OEMs as of lately, there's some minimum lighting requirements, and you know, we're in all of our booths installs now. I mean, they're LED bulbs that are going in, and they meet all of those specifications. But I've walked into a lot of shops that, you know, have the older bulbs, and then they're harder to source. You know, maybe they don't fit in the socket, so maybe it's, you know, be a better idea to try to update some of those systems, even if you're gonna maybe retrofit an old spray booth and put some different lights in there, because we all know what that conversation looks like with that painter that, you know, is not working under the greatest conditions inside of that spray booth. And then we begin to introduce conversations like, oh, maybe it'll match outside, or, you know, because really what it's all about is you want the lighting inside of that spray booth to be similar to what the customer is going to see that vehicle in when they pick it up out in the parking lot, right? So if you're working in a dungeon spray booth, you know, and it's not providing enough light to be able to analyze that color and adjust it to where it needs to be, then probably not going to be successful when you're going to deliver that vehicle out into the...
What I've seen from the OEMs, it's, of course, there's some differences between each one, as always. It's somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 lux is kind of the point that I'm seeing.
They're all starting to go that direction to set a standard for it. And again, I think it's great because it's not just color match if you can't see in the booth, but you also can't tell if you've done a good job on the blend. Is it truly an invisible blend, or once I get where I can see it, am I going to actually see where we blended this color? And as you look at the transparent colors we see today, again, it looks totally different in the light versus in the dark. And we recommend that, you know, every shop out there pretty much right now needs to update their lights. A lot of them have been doing it, which is great, but most shops need to look at that, because I've been in a lot of booths where, well, this light works, but this one doesn't, and the one across from it does, but I've got enough to get by. And you don't. So lighting is critical.
Well, the other thing that we suggest is when you put the new lighting in your booth and you have that above 5,000 K or in that to up to 5,600 K in that range, so you have that daylight capability, put those same lights in the area where you're actually inspecting the car when it comes in, so that you are looking at those colors correctly when you can have those colors chosen before it gets in the paint booth, so that that's all done, because it could be a specialty toner that you may not have on your mixing machine or on your bank, and some of those specialty toners could take a day or two or more to get, and if you're waiting till it's in the paint booth, it's too late. So we highly suggest getting the same lighting out in the area where you're either going to tear it down or where you're going to do the estimating to match what's in your booth, and that makes things a lot more consistent.
Perfect. Well, gentlemen, I think that's about it, the amount of time we have, and I want to thank you guys for coming up on stage and being part of our show and just showing, just spreading your expertise in, you know, your fields, and I just want to thank you.
Yep,
Thank
thank
you.
you guys.
Thanks a lot.